and his name was Tim Robbins.
What was even the context about that? Was there a context, or did you just sing that?
I think we were just kind of mulling around in the kitchen at Northview House, and Chandler just sounded the bell.
Man, we're right in the middle of trying to recap a completely meaningless story, and the bell sounds to start the episode.
Yeah,
so here
so
we
gotta
are.
Stop.
Yeah, quit that reminiscing. Reminiscing is for losers, and we are running out the clock. We are winners.
We are not losers, definitely.
I'm Joseph Craven. We got Chandler. We got Keith. We don't have Roe tonight.
Again.
So, R.I.P. Roe.
I know. Second week in a row, which means that Roe is under review, and next week he's going to have to give a defense for whether or not he should still be on the podcast.
Roe's under review.
the previous Roe is under review. We think Roe might have been targeting. Anyway, Roe's out this week, so we're going to give him a hard time as best we can. But we have everyone here at the, well, I mean, shoot, this is what, like halfway through the regular season?
Yeah,
that's week 6.
That's weird.
What happened? We got, well, anyway, hard to think about, but here we are. A very entertaining week. We got to see the truth, possibly, of some of the highly ranked teams. We got to see redemption stories on some of the teams that pulled off quote unquote upsets. So a lot to discuss. But first and foremost, gentlemen, we got to talk about the Noles. I think it's safe to say that this was the strongest showing that we've seen out of Florida State so far this season in terms of building a lead. And then promptly followed by the strongest Florida State showing that we could possibly have hoped for in terms of completely blowing a lead.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Was there a wide right moment? So I really hope there was.
There actually was. Florida State missed the field goal wide right, and I think they lost the game by 2 points. It wasn't like the last play of the game or anything. 1 point, yeah. It wasn't like the last play of the game or anything, but there was a field goal missed wide right that would turn out to be the deciding factor. So,
yeah. It was
perfect.
Oof, man,
talk about the Noles.
It was incredible to tune in to a game that was 27-7, and to watch Florida State have back-to-back excruciating turnovers that directly led to points in Miami's favor. Like, just this span of like 3 minutes where everything collapsed. And at that moment, I was watching it and just said out loud to the people I was watching with, "That's it. Miami's going to win this game," just because like. It doesn't like I know they're still technically down, but they're going to win.
Yeah,
because Florida State has completely lost control.
Well, I can't tell you how many times I've watched Ole Miss games, and they've had a big lead, and I'm still very nervous because I know they're going to lose, and they have ended up losing. And so it's satisfying to watch a team blow a 27-7 lead that I have no emotional investment in.
Right.
And in fact, am at this point pretty much actively rooting for that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I was rooting for it because if they didn't pull it off, then it would have been the first time I got a Florida State prediction wrong this season. So I was
keeping the streak alive.
I'm keeping the streak alive. That's all it is, baby. All right, let's talk about a few people that deserve credit, might not be getting any credit. I'm going to start this one off because the guy I want to mention real quick is actually getting a lot of credit, so I won't say much about it, but of course, Mississippi State quarterback Nick Fitzgerald broke the record for most rushing yards for a quarterback over the course of a career in the SEC, and he's getting a lot of attention for that, like almost 200 rushing yards against Auburn, so on and so forth. But it impressed me the way he carried himself in the post-game interviews, and then leading up to the game. A lot of fans turned their back on him. A lot of fans were calling for him to be benched, and I mean. Honestly, there were a lot of fans just mad at, the way the game or the team had been coached for 2 weeks in a row, and understandable frustrations as far as the fans are looking at. And he and the other seniors on that team rose to the occasion. And he in particular gave a post-game interview where he thanked his offensive line, who had been miserable for 2 weeks, and thanked the fans for supporting him, even though fans were calling for his head. And so, to achieve something like that, and to give credit to people that he could very easily have just been not said a single thing and just said, "Yeah, I did it. Good for me." I did like the fact that he said he's like, "Yeah, big achievement for someone who out of high school wasn't even supposed to be in the SEC." So anyway, I'm going to give credit for him for that in particular, not the actual accomplishment, for the way he carried himself. And people question his leadership. Seemed like he was trying to take more of a leadership role in that. So I'm going to give him some credit for that. And we'll talk more about that game later on.
I'm just saying, it was 20 years ago that there was another man who the fans turned their back on him, and they questioned his leadership. I'm, of course, talking about Sting, because everybody thought that he was going to turn. He was going to join the NWO. He was going to side with Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And you know what? He didn't. He didn't. And the one thing that we know from that is that the only thing that's for sure about Sting is that nothing is for sure about Sting.
God bless him. My personal favorite wrestler of all time.
Yeah, still mine as well.
I remember as a middle schooler being able to go to the Mississippi Coliseum when WCW came for some event, and he was there, and getting to see him in person wrestle. Not a televised event, obviously, just some sort of something. And man, it was fun to see. But Chandler, you got someone in mind you're going to give some credit to this week?
I've got someone in mind I'm going to give some credit to this week. And it's amazing because his last name fits the moment. Tied 45-45 with the number 7 team in the nation, Texas kicker Cameron Dicker walked out there and nailed the game-winning field goal. And, yeah, he probably is getting a lot of credit, but come on. I wanted to say the Texas kicker Cameron Dicker.
My goodness, that blows.
I wanted to say that. And you know what? There's a certain set of assets that you need to walk out and hit that field goal in that situation. And Cameron Dicker definitely had those assets. So hats off to Texas kicker Cameron Dicker.
I can't tell if I have to censor this entire segment or not, but I think we're good.
It's just a whole bunch of dog barking.
His name is Cameron Dicker. I don't know. Like they got big Dicker energy. Like, what are you doing?
Oh my God.
Wow.
We never should have given you that much free reign.
Well, I mean, what are you going to say about Dicker the kicker?
It's his name. I mean, it's literally his name.
Oh my gosh. All right, Keith, you going to try to salvage this at all?
Yeah.
Salvage it. You're ruining it.
I'm going to give credit to the South Carolina defense. They still gave up almost 300 yards rushing, but they were very instrumental in that third quarter kind of turnaround for that game. Got a couple interceptions, caused a couple of fumbles, really frustrated Drew Lock and that Missouri offense, maybe as much as the rain did.
Yeah, it kind of seems like a shout-out needs to be to Mother Nature in this one.
Yeah. For trying to wash away both of those teams. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as Keith just pointed out, Missouri ran the ball all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, they were running at will. And like, what's weird about that game? We'll talk about that more later. But the stats kept popping up, and Missouri was just caving in South Carolina, but like for some reason just couldn't pull away with it. So
weirdest thing.
Yeah, South Carolina defense for being opportunistic and I guess not giving up 400 yards rushing.
Right. And I want to actually give a bonus shout out to South Carolina quarterback Michael Scarnecchia, who played that game as opposed to Jake Bentley, and went 20 of 35 for 249 yards and 3 touchdowns in the nasty rain. So props to Scarnecchia, I suppose is how you pronounce it. I didn't really research that. Probably should have.
It's Scaramucci.
You're right. My bad.
Yeah, it was the Mooch himself.
The Mooch himself came in. But that's our quick rundown of who deserves credit. Let's jump into the scores of this past week. A quick run through of these. Number 1, Alabama defeated Arkansas 65-31.
Womp womp.
As mentioned, South Carolina was able to defeat Missouri 37-35 in football the way God intended it to be played. Blinding rain, hailstorm, terrible weather.
Lots of head-to-head hits.
Oh yeah, I love it.
There was an actual murder on the field.
Yeah.
Classic SEC football.
Gosh. Almost makes me feel like I need to tell my high school football story on the air, even though I've told both of you guys individually now. Number 22, Florida takes down number 5, LSU, 27-19. Ole Miss defeats UL Monroe, 70-21. Keith, you said they're disrespecting the Tide by putting up more points than they were able to?
Yeah. I mean, it's clear.
It's one of the more disrespectful things of the Tide.
Yeah. I mean, just arrogance.
Texas A&M takes
Paul,
advantage.
I was just calling in to say I heard this podcast the other night, and these boys were disrespecting the Tide, and I was just wondering what it was you could do about it. I'll hang up and listen.
Roll Tide, Paul. Texas A&M takes advantage of some Kentucky miscues to win 20-14 in overtime. Georgia, number 2, defeats Vanderbilt 41-13 in another business-like performance. And Mississippi State runs wherever they possibly can to take down number 8 Auburn 23-9. That's the rundown of the scores. Let's talk about some of these games in particular, and let's jump back into South Carolina and Missouri real quick. It was sloppy, disgusting weather, which made it somehow incredibly entertaining and incredibly painful to watch. As mentioned, South Carolina playing with their other quarterback, who ended up having a very good game. Drew Lock, the gunslinger from Missouri, not having a good game, struggling through the weather. I believe he had 2 interceptions. 2 interceptions, only 200 yards, only 5.7 yards per completion. But Missouri able to move the ball on the ground quite well. Let's see. I'm trying to pull up the stats here. Demaria Crockett, 154 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Larry Roundtree III, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns as well. So here's the question here about this particular matchup. Do we think that South Carolina is like the better team because they won this, or do you think that we benefited from the weather preventing Missouri from having to or from being able to play the style they like to play, keeping in mind that Missouri ran the ball quite well? Chandler, I'll start with you. What's your impression here?
I mean, it's hard to take away from a game like that who the better team really is, because at that point, both teams are just kind of hanging on for dear life. You're just hoping that, you're just. It was miserable. I mean, it was just absolutely miserable to watch. And big ups to South Carolina for coming back and getting the win. I mean, they really needed it. They've kind of had some trouble this year, really doing much of anything. And so I think the weather probably favored South Carolina. Mm-hmm. But as far as who the better team is, I don't know how you say either way in those situations, just because I mean the rain was so bad for such a long time. Yeah. And then on top of all that, you throw in they had a significant actual weather delay when it was like a 2 or 3 point game, and they have to pull the teams off the field for quite a long time. And so I mean that's an impossible situation, I think, to look and say we know for certain one way or the other what either one of these teams are.
Yeah, I mean it disrupts any rhythm. We saw it before. I mean, we saw it with Ole Miss earlier in the year. It's a nasty game. You have to survive. Just when you have weather delays, you just kind of got to survive it. That's all you got to do. Very interesting. You said the weather seemed to, probably play in South Carolina's favor, which it did, but it just makes it interesting that you would have thought South Carolina would have a better rushing attack, all things considered, having guys like Rico Dowdle and Tyson Williams who've been productive on the year, but neither of them really topping much over 50 yards and no touchdowns at all. It actually was the other quarterback. So, Keith, what's your impression of this game?
Yeah, like I said earlier, the stats kept popping up, and Missouri was just caving South Carolina in. I mean, South Carolina benefited from I think the weather started getting really bad in the third quarter, and that's when the game turned on Missouri. Fumbled the ball a couple of times, which weren't actually turnovers, but it kind of killed some drives. And then, of course, Drew Lock throws 2 picks. Missouri never gets their passing attack really going. And South Carolina has a really good third quarter, scores 17 points, and and that's the difference in the game. South Carolina gave up almost 300 rushing yards and somehow still found a way to win. So props to them, props to that defense for getting some turnovers in some crucial moments. But I wouldn't say that South Carolina fans need to look at this and say, okay, yeah, South Carolina's turning the corner. It was just an ugly game that was up in the air. Maybe not literally because nobody could catch the ball.
And what I think is going to be interesting to see moving forward is obviously Jake Bentley for South Carolina missing time due to injury. But what is it going to do for the team if their starter's out with an injury and the backup comes in and leads them to a division victory in nasty weather while excelling 250 yards and 3 touchdowns in terrible weather to lead that charge? What's it going to say to the team? I mean, and what's the rest of the season going to look like? Do they try to stick it out with the backup? Do they bring Bentley back in and think that he still has the better chance? That'll be something to pay close attention to moving forward, I think, for sure. Unless for some reason South Carolina just loses every game for the rest of the year and then we won't ever talk about them again.
Which is possible.
Strong possibility.
Very possible. Very, very possible. We had a wild one between Texas A&M and Kentucky. Of course, it went into overtime. And in overtime, Kentucky's Miles Butler missed a 43-yard field goal that started things off in OT. A&M star running back Travion Williams, who is having himself quite a year, scored on a 10-yard run to give the Aggies a 20-14 victory over the ranked Wildcats, possibly starting Kentucky's signature midseason collapse. We'll have to wait and see how they respond from this. But the question here, in a game in which some of Kentucky's offensive issues might have been exposed, Chandler, what did it seem like A&M did well to handle the Wildcats?
I mean, I confess I didn't watch any of this game, so I don't know. I don't know what happened. But look, Kentucky has been one-dimensional all year. They've been really good at that one dimension. They've been great at running the ball, but it sounded to me. And again, I realize this is very unprofessional of me on our very, very serious and dedicated podcast. I mean, yeah, it's just the ability to at least slow down that running game and to kind of make a game uglier than what they're used to. Because Kentucky's won ugly a lot, and so yeah, it sounded to me like A&M just did a good job with the run and kind of dared them to beat them in the air, and they really couldn't do it.
Yeah, and that's in theory what you'd have to do against Kentucky, and it's been very, very hard to do because because Benny Snell is the type of guy who you hit him 3 times and he just bounces off and keeps going. But you look at the offensive stats, and I mean Terry Wilson just not really throwing the ball downfield well. 13 of 20, but for only 108 yards. So and I mean I think one of the things about Texas A&M, for all of the negatives about the Kevin Sumlin era, he recruited really well. And so there's a lot of talent on that team. There's a lot of talent, especially on that defense. It's not necessarily elite talent that's going to slow down, say, Alabama, but they slow down a pretty good Clemson team. And I think their defense is going to give them a chance to win every other game they play in the SEC this year. And whether they win it or not, we'll see. But they just kind of showed that they can take away something that you do really well on the ground, and I think that's going to be really big for Texas A&M going forward. Yeah, absolutely. Keith, on the other side, we are talking about the offensive issues that have popped up with Kentucky. A one-sided team being kind of exposed here. Benny Snell only getting 60 yards on the ground, no touchdowns. And maybe most notably only carrying the ball 13 times when he's averaged up into this game, he's averaged 23 carries a game. Keith, what seemed to go wrong for the Kentucky Wildcats here?
Well, part of it is that they only get to run 50 plays. So hats off to Texas A&M for keeping that off the field.
Yep.
And I mean,
that's such an underrated stat right there too. To only run 50 plays. I mean,
that's horrible.
That's a fascinating thing to watch. As I'm sorry, I realize I'm interrupting your line of reasosoning here, but like that's such an important,
pretty ridiculous of you.
Yeah,
Chandler.
I'm sorry.
Goodness.
I'll check my privilege next time. But that's a really telling stat, a really important stat that a lot of times gets overlooked. So.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, Texas A&M ran 45 plays or 75 plays. So a pretty wide disparity there in time of possession and just sheer number of plays run. And I think Chandler hit it. You said something about it also that like Kentucky has relied maybe more heavily on their run game than I've seen any team rely on it in a long time. And Terry Wilson did exactly what he's been doing. He's averaging about 100 yards through the air per game. But they shut him down running the ball. He only had 4 yards. And of course, Benny Snell only had 60 yards. So if you shut down their run game, then you stop them dead, you know. And that being said, they still had that scoop and score kind of towards the end of the game to tie it back up going into overtime. So their defense did enough to slow down A&M. And 75 plays, that's a lot of time to be out there.
So, yeah,
well, especially 75 compared to 50. I mean, that's.
I mean,
it's just
because the reality is that there are a lot of teams on offense that 75 plays is a pretty average or even below average day. I mean, you get teams that are running 85, even 90 a game,
right?
And so to cast even that, which again is not necessarily the case for either one of those two teams, but it's the trend of it's just the trend of football in general. To only run 50, I mean, that's just a heck of a defensive effort.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
Absolutely. So looking at it, Kentucky only had 178 total yards, only 70 yards on the ground, their lowest totals on the season. Travion Williams outgained Kentucky by himself. 210 all-purpose yards, 138 rushing, 72 receiving for Williams. So the big question, the question that the three questions we like to ask when it comes to evaluating games, or at least I do, and then I force you guys to ask them as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
What went right for the winning team? What did they do well? What was going wrong for the losing team? What were they slipping up in? And who does this say more about? And I'm feeling like, and this is just kind of my impression of it, is that I feel like this says a little bit more about Kentucky than it does Texas A&M. Just kind of initial thought process. And that's because we're not necessarily – we know by now Travion Williams is a breakout star in this league. Mm-hmm. He's been doing it all year. He's been doing well all year. To have 210 all-purpose yards is really freaking good for him, but it's also something that like we kind of know. And so it says a little bit about Kentucky's vaunted defense if they have trouble against a running back like that. It says something about like that's how they're winning games. They're winning games based off of that stout defense of theirs, which I do think is very good because their offense is extremely one-sided. So I think it says something about Kentucky where if you can get a versatile player like that going, they're not going to be able to stop him. Because that's not even Kellen Mond who's putting up,
right,
that yardage, and really, that's Travion Williams who's kind of starring there. I want to get y'all's opinions though. Do you think this says more about Kentucky or more about Texas A&M? I'll start with you again, Chandler, on this one.
I'm going to give my opinion, but first, a break from our sponsors. No, I'm just kidding.
Running Out the Clock is, of course, sponsored by Young Sheldon on CBS. Catch Young Sheldon on whatever day this fall.
Yeah, exactly. Big young Sheldon fans here. As far as who it says more about, I'm gonna say it's saying more about Texas A&M. Texas A&M. There's a vacuum right now for the second best team in the West. I think going into the season, you kind of looked at that group of really you kind of looked at Mississippi State and Auburn and said, hey, I think that probably one of these two teams is going to be maybe that second best team in the West. But I think I think Texas A&M by winning this game has proven that they're for real. And they've also kind of positioned themselves to be 1-1 in the league after 2 conference games instead of, or is this their third conference game? 2-1 after 3 conference games versus 1-2, to already have a leg up over Mississippi State and Auburn, and obviously they've still got to play those teams, so a lot can change between now and then. But I think they showed they're a good team, and they're going to be in contention. I think right there for that second place spot, and especially if their defense plays like it did, because Auburn and Mississippi State both can also kind of look like one-dimensional teams as well. So it's kind of just a battle of who the best one-dimensional team is at this point, I guess. But I think Texas A&M really set themselves up nicely for as we kind of enter into the second half of the season and that stretch run as they're going to play those other teams comes up.
Yeah, and that's huge for them because of what you just pointed out. Schedule-wise, I mean, they have to go to South Carolina next. Then they go to Mississippi State. Then they go to Auburn. It was almost for Texas A&M. It seems almost like a must-win if they want to remain respectable in the conference to have beaten Kentucky, which is because the next 3 games are all on the road against opponents that in South Carolina and Mississippi State and Auburn all have something to prove that their seasons aren't done yet. Mm-hmm. So it's a very, very tricky part of the schedule there. Keith, what's your assessment? Do you think this says more about Kentucky or says more about Texas A&M?
I think it just says about Kentucky what kind of we've said so far this year and what probably everybody's been saying, because somebody actually finally did that thing, and that was you shut down Benny Snell and you shut down Kentucky. And they did it, and Kentucky's defense showed again that they're good enough to win them games sometimes, because they had no business being that close, and they took them to overtime. So I think while it does say a lot about Kentucky, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Chandler said. And A&M, they're in a weird spot because their only 2 losses are to Clemson, and probably could have, should have won that game. And then, of course, they get routed by Alabama, which we expect that to happen to pretty much anybody who plays them.
Not pretty much, definitely.
Yeah. Well, except for when Alabama goes up against the New England Patriots later in the year.
Yeah,
I don't know, man. I don't know. 2 is better than Brady.
We've always said that, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe A&M is the second best team in the West. They've got Kellen Mond is an interesting player. Wayne said it good last week that he's kind of your gunslinger. He reminds me a lot of Brett Favre in that he's a high risk, high reward type player.
Just don't check into your text messages from him.
Yeah. His arm could very much win you games, but it could very much lose you games. And then, of course, Travion Williams is showing that he's a very elite player. So it'll be interesting to see whenever A&M kind of gets into the meat of their SEC West schedule.
Which is what they're really in right now. I mean, from here on out, they have, 4 straight, because after they get done with that nasty road stretch, their next home game is against Ole Miss, who, depending on how the offense is clicking at that point in time, it can be so much to handle in regards to Texas A&M for sure. Yeah, with Kentucky here, it showed that their defense is beatable. Because there was a span in there in which it looked like they kind of covered everything well. The thing is, it might be that it takes one standout, star performance like what you got out of Williams to do it. And, maybe that's what it takes. But it does show that Kentucky's defense is beatable because their offense already has shown, flashes of that as well. So, yeah. Interesting matchup there between two teams. One team in A&M that's battling to prove they're better than a middle of the pack team, and Kentucky who's trying to maintain a tight level of play, top tier level of play in the East. Battle for that second spot there. Also in the East, Keith's Florida Gators pull off the victory over LSU.
I'm not gonna lie, guys. I was smiling for a good 35, 40 minutes after that game. So good.
Only 35, 40 minutes?
Yeah, because we went to Buffalo Wild Wings and it was very loud and we were surrounded by
and then you had to
JA people. It was weird.
Yeah, you got an order of 12 wings that cost you $45.
It was delicious though.
Gotta love B-dubs.
It's also hard to be around that much success when you're only a Northwest Rankin person. So
God. All right. Main storyline in this game, obviously, LSU quarterback Joe Burrow hadn't lost a game and hadn't thrown an interception all season.
He's terrible.
Florida's pass rush put him in all kinds of trouble all night long. And as it was with Kentucky, LSU's offensive issues were exposed. Keith, we'll turn it over to you real quick. What did your dear, sweet Gators do well?
It's something that I said to you guys kind of late in the game, but Florida has three really good pass rushing defensive ends between CeCe Jefferson, Ja'Kai Polite, and Jabari Zuniga, who has only kind of recently shown that he's finally living up to his talent. But
yeah, has at least two different defensive or D-line players of the week awards in the SEC so far this year.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that the higher profile player, CeCe Jefferson, really had a quiet first half, while the other two made a whole bunch of noise. And then Jefferson starts to kind of light it up later in the game. But that was really it. Florida, outside of that one drive late in the game, just stopped LSU's run game. They were in Joe Burrow's face all night long. And then, of course, he had those two picks late in the game. One was for a touchdown going back the other way, and then one was that kind of game-sealing pick. Florida did, once again, just enough on offense. And again, something else that I texted you guys while the game was happening. Franks might be one of the most confusing quarterbacks to ever play the game. He has a drive where he's perfect, manages the offense perfectly, checks out of bad calls into good calls, hits every pass, is super accurate. And then literally the next drive, and for the next 4 or 5 drives, looks like he's never played football before. And it's just wildly inaccurate, makes bad calls.
It's a very rare condition known as being a college quarterback.
True, but this is, they're just a weird swing. And of course, Piron had himself a heck of a game. Most of his yards came in the second half off of read option plays that apparently LSU forgot how to play against.
They forgot last year.
Yeah.
That's what beat LSU constantly last year as well. It was just read option plays.
They had nobody covering the pitch guy.
Mm-hmm.
They had somebody crashing down on Franks, and then Piron was just out by himself.
Over and over and over again. Yeah. And it just keeps happening. I'm pulling up the stats here. Of course, P. Ryan had 85 yards and then those 2 touchdowns on the ground. Big time right there. Jordan Scarlett added 65 as well. On the other side, and what's pretty notable is that Nick Brossette, one of the leading rushers in the conference, had 95 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was basically the only thing that LSU could do. Most notably on all of this is that the longest scoring play in the entire game was the pick 6 right at the very end. Every other scoring play was a Nick Brossette 4-yard run, a LaMichael P. Ryan 1-yard run, a 3-yard pass from Franks, a 1-yard run by Brossette, and a 2-yard run by LaMichael P. Ryan, and a couple of field goals scattered in there as well. So that is some
Buzz, your girlfriend.
I mean, we said it last week that this was going to be an ugly game, like it always is. What's interesting about Nick Brissett's numbers, so he had 95 rushing yards, but he had a 47-yard run and a 31-yard run on a 1 drive. So Florida forgot how to play run defense for 1 drive.
Yeah,
gave him all of his yards. So like they did a really good job of shutting down the run game, except for 1 drive. And that 1 drive gave LSU the very temporary lead that they had.
Well, let's talk about LSU a little bit more here, Chandler. What went wrong for the Tigers, besides obviously the fact that they're, I don't know what you call Burrow. You don't want to call him a budding star because he hadn't really shown much of anything outside of not really making mistakes. And in this game, he made mistakes. So outside of that, was there anything that really shone through as well, or is that kind of the main thing that really went wrong for LSU?
Yeah, the main thing that went wrong for LSU was that they hired a head coach who, by his own admission, in his own words, hates quarterbacks.
Don't we all?
That is an Ed Ogeron quote. He said that, and I believe it was in the Bruce Feldman book, Meat Market, that was about Ed Ogeron's recruiting practices. And LSU's main mistake was they did not hit the super sim button for offense. LSU's offense is bad. It's bad. Going into the Ole Miss game, it was 14th out of 14th in the SEC, and they got a bump from playing Ole Miss's defense. A lot of teams are going to do that, and they went right back to being who they were. But they finally played a team with a competent enough offense to really kind of move the ball on them, which is not saying a lot because Florida's offense is, competent is like maybe the nicest thing you can say about it right now. And so
getting there, you can say it's showing improvement every week.
Yeah, it's definitely showing improvement, but they're not a team that's going to go out and like routinely, find the open man or find that big hole and get the big run. Like they're the team that's going to fight and claw and scrap for yards and get them and eventually find the end zone. But I think this game has completely exposed LSU. They've done exactly kind of really with the exception of Auburn, they've kind of done what you thought they were going to do this year. And I won't say they've done because the range of possibilities for LSU was so wide. You could see it. You could see them being like, oh my gosh, they're going to be really, really good, or this is going to be like the wheels falling off and putting the Ferrari in the ditch on this one. And it's been a lot closer to just being a pretty okay team. And eventually the defense is going to give out.
Right.
They're gonna realize that they're just not going to be able to do enough or whatever. But that offense is really bad. And I think last night or Saturday. Yeah, yesterday was I forgot what day it was for a second. Saturday
when this episode comes out, it'll be Monday, and so no one's going to know anything.
Yeah, exactly. They just messing with your mind here, people. But Young Sheldon Tuesday nights, CBS
on CBS.
Anyway, no, I think it really exposed LSU because their run game is good, but their quarterback play is just so bad, and it's going to stay that way. Because Joe Burrow's not good. Joe.
Yeah, we all said, we were all saying at the beginning of the year that LSU's schedule, regardless, yes, there's a wide range of where it could be, but LSU's schedule was so nasty that there was, we all felt like the chance that they're just going to be bottom of the West based solely off of schedule. They've risen above that for sure by winning, games that I think we all thought they wouldn't win so far. And then this was kind of seems to me, the reality check for LSU. So when we ask the question, what is this, who does this say more about? There's a lot of good things Florida did in this game. A whole lot of good things Florida did in this game. They ran the ball very efficiently. Like Keith was saying, they were busting out the read options that gave LSU fits all of last season. Dan Mullen did it with Mississippi State against LSU last year, and he came out with almost the exact same game plan with Florida this year, and it worked. And with that, the Florida pass rush put pressure on Burrow to force him to make mistakes. And so Florida did a lot of things well. I do think that this still, at the end of the day, says more about LSU in that it gave people a formula. We've been saying, all right, the defense is good. The defense has been playing very well. The defense might have been playing above the level in which they really should be at. And this brought them back down a little bit. And I hope that doesn't sound like it's discrediting Florida for all the good that they did, because it's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that Florida kind of just handed a bit of a game plan to the rest of the conference to say, okay, guys, look, LSU is still weak to all of this. Ignore the fact that Auburn's offense is dumb because they couldn't move against LSU.
Man.
So that's kind of my impression here. Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it does say more about LSU in the grand scheme of things, maybe.
Right.
Because we've said for the last several weeks now that this is a very typical LSU team. They've got a really good defense and a very average offense, and that they're basically LSU had to execute perfectly to win their games. If they make any mistakes at all, they're going to lose, and that's what happened against Florida. Outside of one drive, they had zero rushing attack. Joe Burrow he was okay. And then he threw 2 picks when the game was on the line. Yeah. They proved our point. I will say this about Florida, though, and then I'll stop. But seeing where they are now after that Kentucky game, I think a lot of Florida fans were thinking, man, like if Florida wins 4 games this year, that's going to be good, because Florida looked horrible against Kentucky. Their offense was terrible.
Yeah, and had a rough schedule stretch coming up as well.
Exactly. Their offensive line looked like a high school offensive line. I mean, they were getting beat every play at every point of attack. Their defense was inconsistent. They were undisciplined, completely forgot how to tackle. I mean, this looked like this season was basically over after that one game, and there was going to be this nasty reality check. And then they beat Tennessee, 6 turnovers, hilarious. Went to state.
To be fair,
very close, tough fought game.
Tennessee.
Yeah, true. Went to state, won a very, very, very difficult game. And now they sort of held serve against LSU at home. And each game, the Florida rushing game has gotten better. Their offensive line has gotten better, and their defense has tightened up a lot. It looks like the Florida defense that we're used to seeing the last decade or so. Still aren't there yet for sure. Florida's offense has a lot to work out, but the promising thing is that Florida's run game is looking better and better every week. And so seeing where they are now versus right after that Kentucky game is basically night and day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that you're going to be able to discuss on this week's episode of Gator Rituals.
Gator Rituals.
Brand new Florida-centric series that Keith Harkins is presenting here on Running Out the Clock.
You can just cut that last 3 minutes of me talking and just upload that.
Oh, okay. So thank you everyone for tuning into this week's episode of Gator Ritual. Don't forget to tune in to Young Sheldon on CBS. Chandler, I want to know your thoughts now, whether or not you agree with Keith's assessment, as well as far as who this says more about kind of in the long run between the two teams.
I mean, I think as far as what it says about both teams in the long run, I think, I mean, look, every game that Florida plays and Florida wins right now is a recruiting pitch. It's Dan Mullen being able to go into players that fit his offensive scheme and being able to sit down with them and saying, "Hey, look at what I'm doing with Felipe Franks. Felipe Franks is a good college quarterback. He's a great kid. He's a great leader for our team, but he doesn't have the skill set that you, unnamed high school recruit, have."
Mm-hmm. Two-star recruit from nowhere, South Carolina. Yeah.
Except that he's going to be able to get named guys now. But I mean, he's going to be able to go in with these guys and really say, because look, going into the state game, your best hope for Mullen was going to be to say, was for Florida to lose a close game and him to kind of put his feet up and say, "Hey, you see what I built at state right there? Like, we're going to do that on a bigger scale here at Florida." Well, now he's flipped that narrative and he's saying, "Look, like, I'm already doing this. We're already beating the Mississippi States and the LSUs of the world, and you 5-star from Florida, whoever you are, you come here and we're gonna start beating the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world." So it says a lot about the direction I think that Florida's headed, but I also think it says a lot about the direction that LSU's headed, because they Orgeron fired Matt Canada, which that may have been the right move. I mean, there was a lot of tension, a lot of things going on there behind closed doors in that program. That probably was for the best for everybody involved. But he brings in Steve Ensminger under the idea that they're going to come in and they're going to run this pro style ball control offense and let their defense win them games. And I don't think they're capable of doing that. Not without a bona fide pro quarterback. And I don't see that player on LSU's roster, and I don't really see that as somebody that they're going to be at this point in the season really be able to recruit and go get. So, to me, it says a lot about this LSU experiment with that Orgeron, because it's not the dumpster fire that we thought it could be, but they didn't make this decision to be finishing 3rd and 4th in the West. They didn't let Tom Herman go to Texas, which, oh, by the way, that looks like that's kind of working out now.
Yeah, it might be.
They didn't let that happen for Orgeron to come in here and to lose to teams and like I said, finish in that 3rd or 4th place in the West thing. Like, they want to compete with Alabama, they want to compete with Georgia and Florida, and right now it's hard to really see that happening. So I'll say that it says a lot more about LSU because it affirms kind of what I really thought about LSU all along, was that they're pardon the pun, but they're a bit of a paper tiger. And I'm done.
I'm not pardoning that pun.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm not going to let that just go by, man.
Chandler is now under review for next week.
Oh, come on. Paper tiger is like a common saying.
It is. It doesn't mean I like it, No, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's there were a lot of question marks about LSU coming in. There were a lot of question marks about the fact that, they weren't unsure about who the quarterback would be. And honestly, let's be honest here. For as much flack as we're giving Joe Burrow right now, he's still the best quarterback they've had in years.
I mean, like it's as much on. I don't want to call out a specific player because you don't know how they respond to coaching or whatever. But I mean, like, Miles Brennan was a great high school quarterback, and kind of he was in a lot of ways touted to be the quarterback of the future for LSU. He even looked looked pretty solid in some games he got to play in last year. And I mean, what in the world, what in the world's going on?
Yeah, it's beginning to be quite a mess if they don't fix some of these issues. It's very I mean, and that's why I think it says more about LSU, is that it says quite a bit about whether or not they're actually able to redeem things when they start going wrong.
And you don't have to go and get an elite quarterback.
No.
Like this offense is perfectly primed for that. Again, I feel like we preface this phrase every time we use it. I hate this phrase, but it's the perfect offense for just a really good, really smart game manager quarterback. You turn around, you hand off.
I love the phrase. Hate that it's used as an insult.
Yeah. You go and hand off to those great running backs. You get the ball to those really good receivers in space, and you don't necessarily have to go out and win a lot of games. And you don't have to go out and be the guy that wins the games. You get the ball to the guy that wins the games, and then you let the defense shut the door. And Joe Burrow's just not capable of that.
Right. Yep. Or at least he hasn't looked like he's capable of it. And
I mean, my opinion on that is, if he were capable of that, he would still be at Ohio State.
I guess, but Ohio State's not a program that's okay with a game manager quarterback. Ohio State's a program that wants JT Barrett.
But if he brought that kind of value to a team, they would have found a way to keep him. I don't know how that looks, what that looks like, but typically when you see a player get away, especially that late in kind of the offseason process, there's not a lot of internal resistance for him leaving. Is what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I just don't think that he was a fit, skill-wise, style-wise, for what Ohio State likes to do, because they
not a fit as a quarterback in college style, like talent-wise.
Maybe I'm not being that hard on the kid, but anyway, the last game that we're going to discuss here before we look ahead to the next week was Mississippi State upsetting number 8 Auburn. Main storyline here: Mississippi State returned to the basics, attempting their fewest pass attempts on the season and rushing the ball as often as physically possible. What's notable about it is that they were able to run the ball well against a very, very good Auburn defense that had actually given up the fewest amount of touchdowns in the league so far this year. So it seems like, and then on the other side of that, Mississippi State's good defense, as it is with LSU and Kentucky, exposed offensive issues when it comes to Auburn. So it seems like it's pretty straightforward as to what Mississippi State did well here. But Chandler, what did Mississippi State do well against Auburn?
The team doctors made sure that Joe Moore had found his medication before the game.
That was the best quote.
No, I mean, yeah. State went back to doing what State needed to do. They ran that read option. They ran it well. They didn't really try to do too much in the air because it just doesn't work for them. And they were able to beat a team that just, quite frankly, can't score right now. And so they got a tough win. It was a big game. Like that's contending for the SEC West, I don't think was really an option for State this year, but being kind of in the thick of that next tier race definitely was. And this kind of keeps them in it. Because if they play like they did Saturday against Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, Arkansas, they've got a great chance to win all of those games. Yeah. And to kind of, to be in the thick of that, maybe even in that kind of, top 15 at the end of the season, in that kind of ranking category. And it's all because they took a step back. They looked at what happened the first 2 weeks, realized it wasn't working, and they went back to play to their strengths. And that's obviously not what Joe Moorhead wants to do long term. But I think there's a certain amount of just excellent humility, excellent leadership to be able to say, hey, look, this is not who we are right now. So we're gonna do what's best for us, and not necessarily what my plan is, my reputation is, and we're gonna go out there and make sure we win these games any way we can.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear that after a couple of weeks, Moorhead was trying to force his scheme more so than he should have been. Mm-hmm. And it was very clear that he and, team captains, senior leaders sat down and said, okay, that's a mistake. Let's go back to what's going on, what was going right last year. And let's really work on that. Along with that, they apparently saw something when looking at game tape against Auburn to just also know what types of runs would work against them, because they ran efficiently and the offensive line seemed to be blocking well. Keith, on the other side, Auburn, another one of these teams in the SEC that is just not demonstrating much on offense. What seemed to go wrong for the Auburn Tigers that led to this, not being able to get a touchdown and eventually giving up 23 points?
Yeah, if you look at the play breakdown, it's clear that the Auburn coaching staff has all but abandoned any hope that the run game is going to show up on a consistent basis. They only ran the ball 21 times.
Yeah.
And of that, Whitlow only got eight touches. It was split out amongst a lot of other guys trying to see what'll work, and as it has all year, nothing has. And so you put the weight of the offensive hopes of Auburn on Jarrett Stidham, and he showed this game that he's not good enough to shoulder the entire load of the Auburn offense, and that's going to be a problem going forward. You can't leave Auburn's defense to get run over like they did against State. State ran the ball 57 times.
Yep.
That's a lot of getting hit right in the mouth. No matter if you're stopping the run some, that's a lot of physical exertion. And especially when you're getting hit in the mouth and then you look back and see a guy running for 40 yards.
Yeah, and that's a notable thing, is that it's not just that Mississippi State ran the ball a lot. They ran the ball very efficiently.
Yep.
Nick Fitzgerald averaged 7 yards a carry. Kylan Hill averaged 5.5 yards a carry. And Aries Williams averaged 6.4 yards a carry. So you got really good, efficiency there.
Yeah. You're giving up 350 yards rushing, going up against what was supposed to be the indisputable strength of the Auburn defense. And good on Joe Moorhead for finally stop being stubborn and look at what he has and saying, you know what, we're basically just gonna do exactly what we've been good at the last 4 or 5 years, and we're gonna go play some man-to-man football.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts just kind of came to me while you were talking. First, with the rushing thing, it wasn't just that they ran it efficiently, because they did, but a lot of that explosiveness kind of came back on the ground because you can be efficient, and that's great, but when you're efficient and explosive, and you're occasionally getting those big runs that I know Fitzgerald had a few big ones. You're getting those kinds of things, then that's when you're really demoralizing the defense. That's when you're really kind of saying like, hey, we're gonna run away with this thing. The other thing is, I was thinking about this earlier today. Jarrett Stidham really reminds me a lot of Jevin Sneed from Ole Miss a few years ago. That he had his first year that he was eligible to play, Jevin Sneed was awesome, and there were several. There were a few talking heads on ESPN, NFL Network, those kinds of things, that said if he had gone out after that first year, he would have been the first quarterback taken. Now, I don't know if he would have been or not, but going into the next year, he lost a few of his guys on the outside. I believe he lost Mike Wallace that year, who was a major safety valve because Mike Wallace could just run past everyone. And he lost his left tackle. Michael Orr was replaced with Bradley Sowell, and Snead really struggled and couldn't hit a lot of those down the field passes. And there was a play. I think it was in the first half of the game last night where they ran a little flea flicker reverse thing, and Stidham just airmailed on a receiver that didn't have anybody 20 yards within him. But the reason he did was because he was getting blown up as he threw the ball. And so I couldn't help when I saw that, but think like that was Jevon Snead's problem. That Stidham maybe should have struck while the iron was hot and gotten out last year. But yeah, and then the other thing, the strength of Auburn's defense. The guys on TV pointed this out, that a lot of State's really big and really successful runs were runs to the corner because they were staying away from those guys in the middle on Auburn's defense. And I think that was exposing some of their speed at linebacker and speed in the secondary.
Yeah. I mean, if we're asking the question of who it says more about, it does say a lot about Mississippi State playing to their strengths, but also noticing a game plan that would work against that vaunted Auburn front seven, and exposing some of that. Exposing weaknesses against the right. Exactly what you're saying, Chandler. That's really what they did well. And it was weird because Mississippi State continually they never lined up with a running back in the backfield. They lined up with the running back in a slot position, got set, then motioned him into the backfield and ran. And I don't know what the purpose of that was, if that was just to kind of try to, make Auburn account for, hey, this guy might stay in the slot just in case type of thing. I don't know. But you could tell that there was a purposefulness to their game plan that shows that, Moorhead was trying to learn from the mistakes. He's a first-year head coach. He's having to learn from the mistakes regardless of how talented a team he might have inherited. He messed up, 2 weeks in a row, and he learned from that. So,
honestly reminds me a lot of like what Will Muschamp did whenever he got to Florida. Like he was dead set on installing a pro offense,
right?
Or a pro style offense, despite the fact that he had, a quarterback like Jeff Driscoll, who's very similar, I think, to Nick Fitzgerald, and
tall, kind of lanky, deceptively fast.
Yeah. And a lot like what happened like the last 2 weeks, Jeff Driscoll was the scapegoat for a bad Florida offense. Despite the fact that they took an entire offense that was very obviously suited to a spread option attack and tried to make them line up in a pro set and throw the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. It was fitting what's the old term? Round peg in a square hole or something. Square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was for a little while there. So to Mississippi State's credit, they made some of those adjustments. It did show that the offensive line is still good at what they were good at, and still bad at what they're bad at, but still good at what they're good at. It showed that the defense was a little bit more well-rounded in this game. Incredible performances from both of their safeties, Jonathan Abram and Mark McLaurin. But and cornerback Cameron Dantzler is shaping up to be one of the best coverage corners in the SEC. But at the end of the day, this ultimately still, to me, says much more about Auburn. Yeah. It says a whole lot more about the fact that Auburn and LSU both got very fortunate from preseason rankings, beat a couple of teams that looked good at the beginning and don't look as good now, and have benefited from that to climb up into top 10 rankings, when in reality, they're probably more of a, 10 to 20 ranking, probably 15 to 20 ranking talent sort of team. And Mississippi State took advantage, showed some of that, again, showing a bit of a game plan of how you do run against Auburn, what you can do to get past Auburn's defense. And so I think it does say more in the long run about Auburn, because Mississippi State and Auburn, you said it earlier, Chandler, were kind of, a lot of people thinking, supposed to be the teams to battle for second, third place in the West. So for them to come out here and Mississippi State be able to kind of right the ship while Auburn continues to struggle in a lot of ways, it's not surprising. We expected Mississippi State to run the ball well this year. They finally did it.
Yeah.
Auburn, we've expected better out of, especially out of Stidham, a returning strong arm quarterback, and they're struggling. So to me, it says more about Auburn right now and moving forward. Chandler, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's Auburn all the way. I mean, I think that, you know, what we saw with Mississippi State was what we thought we were going to see with Mississippi State all year long. And you can what if those last two games to death.
Right.
You know, you can what if them to death. It's also certainly possible that Florida and Kentucky are just better teams, and you just kind of, none of that's really helpful. But the Gus bus has turned big time into the struggle bus, and they like at the end of the year last year, you know, they beat Alabama, they beat Georgia. And it was just such a big deal in those two games that they got really emotional, and they kind of overlooked what was in a lot of ways a team that still, even as they were really good last year, still had a lot of the same kind of glaring weaknesses that they always kind of seem to have. And they went out and they paid big money to keep Gus, and I don't know, man. They're a mess offensively, and.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big part of that is Gus's refusal to accept that he's not always the smartest guy in the room. Like there was a play early in the game where Auburn was moving the ball pretty well.
Yeah.
Moving the ball down the field. They got in the red zone, and they run a trick play. The running back fumbles the snap, and it was like, why are you doing that? Like, you're getting, you know, you're not blowing them off the line or anything, but you're getting a couple yards of carry. It's third and short. You've got a chance to score here. And you know, if Auburn scores an early touchdown last night, that probably changes the course of the game a little bit. You know, I don't think it necessarily means that Auburn wins the game, but it certainly changes the way things are kind of shaping up early. Yeah. And they're just not they're not good on offense. And I think I don't know this for sure yet, but I think that their defense is getting exposed a little bit. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens as it goes on. But I think it tells us a lot more about Auburn than it does about State.
Yeah, Auburn also had everything kind of go wrong for them anyway. The play you just mentioned where they just kind of botched it, even if it was a bad play call, it still just didn't go right. And then they had a touchdown, and is it Cam Martin running the ball who fumbled it?
It was Whitlow.
Whitlow ran. Yeah, it was Whitlow who fumbled it into the end zone. You know, it's just everything. They didn't catch a break either the entire game, so it just kind of was a perfect storm for them. But Keith, who do you think it says more about, Mississippi State or Auburn moving forward?
Moving forward, probably says more about Auburn for a lot of the same reasons that you guys just said. I think we even mentioned it last week that what you see with Auburn's offense is what you see for the year. Like, it's not like they've struggled early and then it looks like there's signs that they're going to turn it around. Like this is it. There's zero run game, and Jared Stidham's going to have to win them games.
Yeah.
And going forward, you know, we said this a few times about other games, but State just provided a blueprint for how to manage Auburn, and that is you run the ball down their throat a whole bunch of times, and then force Jared Stidham to beat you, and that's not going to happen.
Which is why it's going to be a lot of fun watching Ole Miss try to throw the ball on them 60 times.
Yeah, exactly, and not run the ball ever.
Scotty Phillips having an aneurysm on the sideline, yelling, "Just let me do it, please." Oh, man. It's going to be interesting looking forward. You know, we mentioned in our preseason episodes, but Auburn has had a 1,000-yard rusher for the last 9 years.
Yeah.
Right now, Whitlow has 414 yards on the season, but it's going to take quite a bit for him to get, you know, back going on a consistent pace.
Yeah, they're also about to hit a bunch of really good run defenses, so good luck.
Yeah, and he got 88 yards against Mississippi State, most of that being on that really long run that he then fumbled on.
Right.
I think that one was like a 30-yard run or something like that.
You do have to include the 250 yards he'll get against Ole Miss.
Right. So let's just go ahead and spot him that.
Well, yep. So
I wish
maybe
I
he
wish
is on pace.
I wish I was joking.
But it's going to be, that's going to be one of the other interesting storylines to look at. Stidham was expected to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year. He's doing some of what he can. Yeah, he's missing a lot of pieces, though. Yep. He is missing a lot, and what he does have, he doesn't seem to be gelling with. Like, there's just doesn't seem to be as much chemistry with him and like Darius Slayton quite in the same way. Anyway, be interesting to see moving forward if Auburn can right any of those wrongs. And they've got a decent chance to do it this week. Let's look ahead at some of the SEC matchups coming up in this week. Tennessee goes to Auburn. Tennessee looking for anything this year. Auburn looking for an opportunity to tune up the offense that has been struggling. Chandler, preview this game for us just a little bit, if you will, please, sir.
I mean, Tennessee's bad. I know that's like, I know that's a running joke, and I very much enjoy making fun of Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt because I think he's terrible, and I think they're terrible, and I think they deserve one another. But the thing about Tennessee that I begrudgingly have to admit is that they earned some of my respect against Georgia. That they never really, even though they were never really in that game, they never really gave up. They never really quit. They just kind of kept playing hard. And I think that Auburn's in a rough spot right here because Auburn is in a place where they've lost 2 games. They're coming in off of winning the West last year. They beat Alabama. They beat Georgia at the end of the season. Everybody's always going to remember those games from last year. They're on the verge of kind of realizing they don't really have anything to play for. And Tennessee is still very much in the, hey, like we've got our guy, we love our guy, we're going to fight for him, we're going to do everything we can. I think that Auburn's going to win the game because I think that Tennessee's defense is bad enough that that Jarrett Stidham will kind of be able to correct a little bit. He'll hit some big throws and they'll get the run game going. But I think that's a game that I could see being a heck of a lot closer than people think it's going to be, just because of that angle that I mentioned. That Tennessee is still going to be clawing and fighting for everything they can get, and Auburn, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what kind of place a team is in mentally, especially after a game like Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. A great point for sure. I mean, we talked about. In particular, I guess Roe and I talked about on our Mississippi State podcast, The Weekly Pessimist, we talked about some of the mental fragility that Mississippi State had shown where things went wrong against Kentucky and Florida and they collapsed as a team. Auburn has to face that right now. They have to face the fact that right now, unless they have a massive turnaround, they're going to drop off entirely from where they were expected to be at the beginning of the year. But Auburn, to their credit, it will go a long way if they're able to do anything against Alabama or Georgia to end the season, just in terms of redeeming things. Because winning covers a multitude of sins. That's just how it is.
It does indeed.
It does indeed. So, yeah, I think this will be a very entertaining game because I think Auburn, if they don't give it their all, then that's what is kind of the breaking point.
They struggle with Southern Miss, but
that was another game that had weather delays and everything.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of weather delay games.
There have been a lot this year. It's very strange. Is it an El Nino year? Is that it?
Spanish for the Nino. Yeah, so I don't know what to expect from Auburn the rest of the way. I mean, they are more talented than Tennessee is, and I think that's gonna take them where they need to go Saturday.
You absolutely cannot lose to Tennessee if you're Auburn right now.
No, yeah. No. I mean, losing to Tennessee this year for any SEC team is basically a death wish for that coach.
Right. Pretty much. Speaking of teams from the state of Tennessee, Florida travels to Vanderbilt in this matchup. this upcoming week. Vanderbilt, of course, just had to go up against Georgia in a 41-13 loss. Vanderbilt kind of being more grounded in reality, and Florida is building more and more momentum every week. Keith, talk to us a little bit about this game.
Yeah, so Florida kind of building up every week, getting better and better and better, and then they play Vandy, and that historically has been a very kind of odd game. It's usually like an 11 o'clock game. It's in Nashville, at a very quiet stadium. It's basically a scrimmage, and those types of games usually means that one of the teams fall asleep, and so that's what Florida kind of has to be aware of this week and look out for. I mean, talent-wise, stats-wise, Florida should win this game going away. But, Vandy, like they did against Notre Dame randomly, they can occasionally jump up and give a team fits. So,
for sure.
The key, I think, is going to be for Florida to kind of keep committing to the run game. Let Franks manage the offense, kind of check down every once in a while. But I think that Florida has to give Vandy a heavy dose of Scarlett and Piran, and hopefully give Pierce some more carries this game, because he didn't touch the ball at all last week. And then for Vandy, keep it close and see what happens at the end, which has kind of been their blueprint for winning big games the last few years.
I mean, Vandy has low-key had an impressive offense this year. Mm-hmm. I mean,
Shermer's a good quarterback.
Shermer's a good quarterback. He's got 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns. Keyshawn Vaughn had a productive year running the ball, 439 yards and 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And not to mention that they've got a guy in Khalija Lipscomb who has almost 500 receiving yards himself, one of the statistical leaders in the conference right now. Their defense is starting to fall apart a little bit. They looked like they might be a decent pass rush at the beginning of the year, and now it's fading away. But Vandy's offense is still not something to overlook. It'll be an interesting test for Todd Grantham on the defensive side of things for sure. Another matchup to look at here, Missouri travels to Alabama. Missouri, of course, still fighting, scratching, clawing to try to be one of the top teams in the East again. Had to play that just messy game against South Carolina. To Missouri's credit, it is not easy. It is not fun to go up against Alabama at any point in time. To Missouri's credit, they are developing a much more well-rounded offensive attack. And we mentioned that in that recap of their game against South Carolina. But yes, we knew coming into the season that Drew Lock was going to be good, and he has been, statistically speaking, for almost 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns through the air. But Roundtree is starting to really be a well-rounded weapon on the ground, along with the other running back whose name has just escaped me, Demaria Crockett. I remember Demaria, and I couldn't remember Crockett, which I think is interesting. But Demaria Crockett the two of them have been productive. And then, of course, Emmanuel Hall has been one of the league leaders in receiving yards as well. So to Missouri's credit, they are becoming a more well-rounded offense. That being said, you're still going against Alabama. Alabama has the most talented starting quarterback that they have possibly ever had, because they have been a team that has won a lot with game-managing guys. They've actually got a playmaking quarterback right now into Tagovailoa, who just had a lot of big plays against Arkansas. You look at that box score, and it's like, what do you have? You have a 76-yard touchdown pass right at the beginning of the game to Irv Smith. You have a 47-yard pass that is like fumbled and then recovered for a touchdown. You have a 42-yard pass later on. They got a lot of playmakers in offense, the Crimson Tide. So it doesn't bode well for Missouri. But to Missouri's credit, they might be able to put up some points at the end of the game, kind of like Arkansas did, to try to save face a bit, make it look like they actually moved the ball better than they did. Wouldn't be surprised to see that happen from Missouri, but they are going up against Alabama. Alabama's looking untouchable. Probably going to be a nasty game. But Missouri, I think, has a chance to close the season out pretty well if their offense continues to be well-rounded like that. Ole Miss travels to Arkansas in what will be a very, very interesting game for two teams fighting very hard to not drop down to the very bottom of the conference. You would think Ole Miss has the firepower to prevent that from happening. Chandler, though, give us a preview on this game between the Rebels and the Razorbacks.
If you want to talk about weird games, Ole Miss and Arkansas. Ole Miss single-handedly kept Brett Bielema employed for several years longer than he should have been. I mean, like if you look at his SEC record, it was abysmal, but it was significantly less abysmal because they beat Ole Miss like every year, even when Ole Miss should have been the better team. I mean, to the point that, you know, Arkansas's tight end is just blindly throwing the ball over his head and it's landing in their running back's hand. You know, it's just this game is always inexplicable. This is maybe the most important game of Matt Luke's season. It may be the most important game of his career because last year, Ole Miss and Arkansas, Ole Miss raced out to a big lead. I believe it was Jordan Ta'amu's first SEC start, and rushed out to a really big lead, looked really good, and then Arkansas just slowly chipped away until they ended up winning the game. And a lot of people kind of looked at that. A lot of people kind of looked at that game last year as the nail in the coffin for Matt Luke's campaign to get the permanent head coaching job. Surprise, surprise, the joke was on all of us. Ole Miss has to win this game. The fan base is already kind of frustrated with Luke, but to Luke's credit, nothing has happened this year that so far that was not expected to happen. I mean, if you go back and you take that Southern Illinois game and you make it a 68 or 65 to 24 game instead of 65 to 38 or whatever the final score ended up being, I don't remember. Then everybody's just kind of thinking, yeah, you know, that LSU game, that Alabama game were rough. You know, Ole Miss should be able to do whatever they want on offense. And Arkansas's quarterback play is bad. And I'm not going to say that their defense has figured it out, but their defense finally did what you would expect an SEC defense to do to an inferior opponent.
Sure.
Against Louisiana Monroe, they swarmed to the ball. I think I don't really remember. I think they got a couple of turnovers. They got some sacks. You know, they really played well. There was a special teams blunder and a garbage time touchdown. So, you know, who really cares about those? So yeah, Ole Miss really needs to win for the psyche of the fan base, for confidence in for confidence in what Matt Luke is doing, for recruiting, for everything involved. But I mean, good grief. You mentioned Arkansas to Ole Miss fans, and we just get PTSD because there have been so many. I mean, going back to what my sophomore year of high school, that game that went into like 7 overtimes, and it just seems like that game is always just so weird. And so I think Matt Luke can go a long way in righting some of the wrongs of the season by just going and winning, because if you win this game, you instill some confidence in your team and your fan base that as you've got South Carolina and Vanderbilt and Mississippi State left on the schedule, you're looking at those as games and saying like, hey, you know what, those teams might have a little bit more talent than us, but we feel confident that we can go in and win those games. But if you lose this game, then that takes all the wind out of your sails. And so I don't really know. I don't know enough about Arkansas to really talk about them. I know their highlight of the year has been keeping it close against A&M. Like not even actually winning, just keeping it close. But that's more than Ole Miss can say in SEC games so far. So, I mean, it's going to be. I don't know. I feel like Ole Miss should be able to score and find just enough on defense to slow Arkansas down enough, because Chad Morris just doesn't have what he needs to run the offense the way he wants to.
No, he doesn't, and he has to keep rotating a whole lot.
Yeah,
as of personnel, especially quarterback personnel, he has to rotate a whole lot to just kind of fit anything that works at all. So
no real consistency there.
No, not at all. That being said, Arkansas has gotten, it seems, a little bit better every week, to their credit. I mean, yes, they were able to give A&M as much of a push as they possibly could have wanted. They saved some face against Alabama late by putting up some points to make it look better than it actually was. Doesn't mean any of that will translate to anything, because it could be that nothing carries over week to week. You could very well have, it could be 70-21 in Ole Miss's favor against Arkansas.
This is a game that Arkansas believes they can win. It's a game that Arkansas, I think their players, they've seemed to have responded really well to Chad Morris, and so it seems like, hey, this is a game we can really go out and get for our coach and show him we love him. So I mean, it's going to be a buzzsaw for Ole Miss.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch. Another one I think is a very interesting one to watch this weekend will be Texas A&M at South Carolina. Long distance to travel for Texas A&M. But these are two teams that have a lot to fight for. What you were saying earlier, Chandler, A&M is fighting to prove that they are more than just a middle-of-the-pack SEC West team. South Carolina trying to hold on to, being the second best in the East. A&M is becoming once again, just like I mentioned with Missouri, a more well-rounded offense. Obviously, Travion Williams has been a breakout star. Kellen Mond has been very productive. A&M's trying to continue that train. South Carolina is trying to right a lot of things that had gone off or gone wrong, especially with the injury to Jake Bentley that they thought would really derail things. Obviously, the backup quarterback did well this past week. But these are two teams that have a lot to fight for in this matchup. This could be, this could very well be A&M's opportunity to prove a point, especially taking a game on the road and a long distance to travel sort of game. But it could, on the other side of things, go very much South Carolina's favor and then ride the momentum of beating a division opponent and now being able to try to prove a point against the West, which the East right now has been winning games against the West this season. South Carolina hopes to continue that trend. This is probably going to be, on paper, and I've said this before about other matchups, and it has not worked out that way. But this is going to be, on paper, I think, one of the most entertaining games of the weekend, because these are two what look like very evenly matched opponents with no necessarily clear-cut favorites outside of the fact that A&M has probably been a little bit more, or not probably, has definitely been more consistently productive on offense, and South Carolina gets home field advantage, doesn't have to travel halfway across the country to play the game. I think this is going to be a very interesting one. We'll see what happens, though.
It's almost like Texas is neither the South nor the East.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. Of course, if you ask my mother, neither is South Carolina. Doesn't belong in the SEC. They're not a real SEC school.
I mean, they started the Civil War.
But my mom is just like SEC. They're not an SEC team. Get them out of here. So we got two.
You can start the Civil War, Paul, but you can't be in the SEC.
You got two teams that my mom does not acknowledge in A&M and South Carolina playing against each other this weekend. Finally, rounding things out, Keith, give us a little bit of a preview of the big marquee matchup as Chandler apparently drops a bunch of silverware on the floor.
That was my banjo finger picks.
Keith, tell us about the marquee matchup of the weekend. Georgia traveling to LSU. Georgia trying to maintain top spot. LSU trying to not completely implode.
Yeah, so this is turning out to be maybe a little less of a marquee game than it was looking like it was going to be last week. But both teams were trying to kind of kind of maintain their respective East-West races. Georgia, obviously, with Florida and Kentucky having lost already this year, they are a little more established in that. So LSU is suddenly playing for their West lives here. It helps that they're going to be at home. It's going to be really interesting to see how the LSU defense bounces back against a game that saw them give up 200 rush yards to a Florida team that has a decent run game, but is still kind of finding its legs. Georgia, I think, has a overall more potent rush game, so it'll be really interesting to see how LSU's defense is going to bounce back. I mean, with LSU's defense, you don't have to guess at all what they're going to do. They're going to lock it down and play man on the outsides, and they're going to dare you to run at them. And so I don't see Georgia backing down from that at all. And then again, I don't think LSU's offense matches up very well against Georgia's defense at all. Georgia's defense is very fast. They're very opportunistic. Again, LSU's offense is going to have to play a perfect game for them to have a chance here. It helps that they're at LSU, but that's all the help that they're going to get, you know?
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see if Kirby Smart keeps only letting Jake Fromm throw it like 17 times a game.
He hasn't necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hasn't had to, you know.
Yeah.
They've got some, like you just pointed out, they've got some good production and Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift on the ground, and they've been able to do enough defensively to shut teams down and have not had to do a whole lot offensively late in games. They've been kind of boring to watch late in games.
Yeah. I mean, if LSU's front seven bounces back in a big way and shuts down the run game, and now Georgia, for the first time in basically the last 2 years, has to rely on Fromm to throw the ball well and often. LSU's got a really good secondary, and they play man defense really, really well. I mean, they cover very well. There's not a whole lot of room to throw out there, so it'll be interesting to watch that matchup.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, it will. I think it's time, gentlemen, for us to do some predictions.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. I don't know why we jumped into the Monday Night Football, but all right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Looking back over last week, it was not a banner week for any of us in making predictions.
Yeesh.
I think we all basically picked the same people.
Yeah. Keith was the only one who picked Florida, so that's the only difference. We all picked Miami. We all picked Notre Dame. We all picked Alabama. We all picked Georgia. We all picked Ole Miss. And so we got the Missouri-South Carolina game wrong. We got the Kentucky and A&M game wrong, and we got the Mississippi State and Florida. I'm sorry, the Mississippi State, Florida was written underneath it. The Mississippi State and Auburn game wrong, Florida being the only game in which Keith. All right, so that being said, we all got 5. Keith happened to get 6 correct. So on the season so far, Keith's still in the lead with 57 correct predictions. Roe and I tied for second place with 54. Chandler with 52 going into week 7. Keith, I noticed on our little spreadsheet, you've already got the spreads written out for me.
I noticed it this time, so I actually went ahead and filled it out.
Man, you're the best. You're the best. And we have Roe's predictions already entered in.
I got you, baby.
Look at that. Perfect. All right. We're going to start off. Yeah. All right. I'm going to get you like more speaking opportunities next time. I'm going to get you to lead off every segment. Start with Tennessee at Auburn. The spread here presented by Keith and Young Sheldon on CBS. Auburn's a 17-point favorite.
Yep.
Yikes.
Yep. Auburn a 17-point favorite against the Volunteers. Chandler, who you picking in this one?
I'm going to go with Auburn, but like I said, it's not going to surprise me to see that game go the other way.
And I feel like 17 is way too many.
Yeah, I really
I
don't
agree.
like that spread at all. I think Auburn wins, but I think Tennessee covers that.
I'm thinking kind of the same thing as well. I think this is an ugly one, but it ends with an Auburn victory.
And
Speaking of ugly,
what was Rose pick?
Rowe picked
Auburn.
Auburn as well. No comments from Rowe this time around, huh?
That's a bummer.
no, he
Yeah.
just circled a bunch of teams.
Did he send you a picture?
Yep, he sent me a screenshot of like the CBS app and just circled all the teams that he was picking.
R.I.P. Rowe.
I
Yep.
love it. I love Rose so much. All right. He's easily my favorite out of all of you guys. I just want to point that
That's
out.
fair. He's also my favorite out of all four of us,
He's my least favorite.
including myself.
Florida travels to Vanderbilt. Keith, I'll actually let you give the spread on this one instead of talking over you.
Florida's a 7-point favorite.
Odd.
Yeah, not like 6.5 or
It's an odd
7.5.
score.
Yeah,
It's an odd spread there. Chandler, what you think in this one?
Florida by double digits.
Keith?
going Gators.
Yeah, I don't really see how it's only a 7-point favorite. I would take Florida by 17. I'd swap that Auburn and Florida spread.
I think Florida's offense has looked so limited.
Yeah.
I mean, Auburn's offense has looked limited too. The limited too, like that store in the mall. But yeah,
Auburn are Florida offensive shirts.
Yeah, exactly.
but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Florida has just looked so limited on offense that it's hard to kind of predict them doing much more than a 7-point win against anybody. But hey, we'll see.
Missouri and Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Keith?
Alabama is a 28-point favorite.
Whew. Poor Missouri. Chandler, what do you think?
Hey, Paul, this here's Bill from Northport, and I was just going to call and tell you about a story that Coach Bryant told me one time several years ago, back when I was at the Montgomery Touchdown Club meeting, and Coach Bryant said to me, he said, now Bill, he said there ain't but 3 things that can happen when you throw the ball. All right, 2 of them are bad, and you know what? I see Missouri as a team that just wants to throw the ball. And I think that the key to victory for the Tide this weekend is going to be to run the ball, and they're going to run the ball, and the Tide's going to roll, Paul. So roll Tide, and I'll hang up and listen to you talk.
Run the dang ball. There are 2 things that can go bad when you throw the ball: incompletion or offensive pass interference. Those are the 2 things. Keith, you got any differing opinion here, or are you Bama as well?
Alabama.
I picked Bama. Rowe picks Bama. Rowe also picked Florida, by the way, over Vanderbilt. I forgot to mention Rowe's pick.
I think Bill from Northport is my new character.
I would say I'm a fan. That would be a lie, but I do think that you should keep doing it.
I mean, my first name is William, and I live in Northport, so
Hey, there you go.
it's not even a stretch.
It's not even a character. It's just you unleashing your true self upon us all.
Yes, it
And
is.
we do not want it.
No one does.
Ole Miss at Arkansas. Keith, what's the spread?
Ole Miss is a 5-point favorite.
Ooh, that line has already moved a lot because it opened at 7.5.
And who knows what it'll be by the time the game
It's going to
actually
be
starts.
it's going to be a 0.5 spread.
All right, Chandler, what do you think? Who you picking here?
Oh, I don't know, man. This is a hard one for a lot of reasons that I mentioned. I'm gonna go with Ole Miss because I do think the firepower is enough on offense for Ole Miss, and I think that Scotty Phillips is in line for a big day, and so we'll get Scotty running the ball, and hopefully that'll kind of shorten the game a little bit. And yeah, I'll go Ole Miss.
Keith?
Arkansas's defense is so bad. Tua had 340 yards passing and 4 touchdowns in the first half
on 10 completions.
Yeah,
Right.
and then they just took him out of the game because they were afraid that the next pass he threw, his arm would come out of his socket and fly out of the stadium.
But it would be a complete pass to Jerry Jeudy, oddly enough.
Yeah.
45-yard completion. He caught the ball and to his arm and then reattached it after.
No, Judy would fumble and then Ruggs would pick it up and score.
Oh, right, of course.
and then Henry Ruggs' brother Cavante would leave Oxford and come and punch him in the face.
Yep.
Which is still the only highlight from the Ole Miss Alabama game.
Yeah. So I think Ole Miss wins, but I could definitely see this being a shootout.
I'm picking Ole Miss, and this is always a weird game, but I do think that there's just as good a chance that Ta'amu is able to complete 70-yard passes on the Arkansas defense, as it was shown this past weekend, for Arkansas to be able to outscore. I could see this being a game. I jokingly said 70-21, like the ULM and Ole Miss score earlier. I could see Ole Miss drop 70 and Arkansas get like 50.
Yep.
I could see that happening in this one. I think it's bigger than a 5-point victory. It's bigger than a field goal victory.
It could be one of those classic, 52-50 games.
If that happens,
Arkansas wins off of like a helmet deflection that falls right into a guy's arms that he races into the end zone.
Right. This one's hard to predict.
If that happens, Wesley McGriff needs to be left in either Little Rock or Fayetteville. In fact, drive him to the place that the game wasn't played and leave him there.
I love it. A&M goes to South Carolina in a game that for some reason does not have a spread listed yet. So
they're probably waiting to hear about Jake Bentley.
Most likely. So A&M South Carolina, we have nothing to base it on as far as the spreads, as far as the bookies go. Chandler, who you picking?
I'm going to go with A&M. I think South Carolina still has left a lot to be desired, even as they beat Missouri. And I'm going to say this can be a win for Jimbo and the Aggies.
Keith?
Yeah, it doesn't matter who South Carolina plays a quarterback. They're going to lose.
Jimbo and the Aggies.
Rose going with A&M. I hate to do it, but I'm picking South Carolina.
I got to get some picks there somewhere, right?
I do, and also I feel like South Carolina is going to. This is my bold prediction. South Carolina doesn't play Bentley, sticks with the other guy, pulls out a victory, rides him for the rest of the season. That's the bold prediction. I don't feel any good about it because South Carolina has disappointed me all season long. And then last week I did not pick them. And of course they win.
Yeah. Like Missouri ran all over them with a very average running game. Travion Williams is going to have 1,000 yards in one game.
Right. Yeah, he just might. I don't know. I'm sticking with South Carolina here, but in the spreadsheet, I'm going to write down A&M and in parentheses say, but really South Carolina, and hope that maybe writing down A&M is enough for South Carolina to win it. Like last week when I wrote down Missouri because I can't trust them anymore. So I'm writing down A&M parentheses actually South Carolina and hoping that that's a good omen. So the big matchup, Georgia at LSU. What's the spread in this one, Keith?
Georgia's a 6-point fave in Baton Rouge.
Woo. They're going to play under the lights?
Old Red Stick.
Baton Rouge
like
night?
Like a 3 p.m. game.
Yeah, it'll be 3 p.m. on CBS, and LSU fans will be pissed.
CBS
Chandler,
is at 2:30. Wait. I totally. We're talking Georgia LSU, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Georgia. I mean, I don't think that LSU is really going to be able to score on them. So give me Georgia.
Keith?
At first glance, the spread looks a little bit offensive, but after thinking about it, I think that's going to be pretty close. Ugga, but close.
Yeah.
Closer than the experts think.
Double, not so fast.
Double, not so fast. This is going to be a weird one. It's very much a weird one, and I misspelled Georgia while writing it down on Keith's prediction, so it now says Georgia.
Perfect.
This is a weird one for sure.
The correct spelling is JAWWWWWWWJA.
Right, of course, Georgia. No, JUH at the end. Georgia. It's a weird one for sure. I think that this is one that could play very firmly into the weird Gator rituals that happen in in LSU. I love that Keith named his Florida section Gator rituals, considering it was a joke we said about LSU. But I think this could play very handily into LSU's favor in that regard. It could be a very weird one. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to say LSU pulls out a weird victory like they did against Auburn, a weird, ugly one that doesn't show anything about LSU actually being good. They just somehow win. I'm picking the Bayou Bengals here to defeat the Georgia Bulldogs. All right. We've got, of course, the Noles to predict. Wake Forest travels to Florida State in this upcoming matchup. Keith, is there a spread in that one?
There is not a spread. I think they've given up on Florida State. As has everyone.
Yeah. Wake Forest is a weird team right now. They've got the potential against some teams to drop some serious points. Then they got the potential, like they did this past weekend against Clemson, to not get anything and get beaten 63-3.
Yikes.
Yep. So far in the year, they've had to play a tough schedule. A couple weeks back, they played Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat them 56-27. Wake Forest beat Rice 56-24. Wake Forest also lost to Boston College at one point, 41-34. Beat Towson 51-20. Then, of course, there's that Clemson loss. Wake Forest all over the place in terms of scoring points and getting beaten or beating other teams. This is a weird team, no spread. Who you picking, Chandler? The Demon Deacons or the Noles?
I've actually watched Wake Forest play several times this year. I don't really know why, but I have. And
it's just by accident.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was sort of after watching QB1, I'm like, maybe Tavon Bowers will play. It doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon. They're not very good.
Yeah.
And I think that for all of Florida State's troubles they've had this year, they're not playing a good team, and so I think they're gonna win. Florida State is gonna win.
Yeah, Keith, who are you thinking?
Noles.
I'm also gonna go with Florida State in this one. I think that as bad as last week ended for them, there's no possible way they could blow this one. Also, right. We always pick one random matchup to predict. Roe didn't send in his prediction for the Florida State game, so I don't have anything to say for him. And the random prediction I picked right before we started recording, because this is a very, very interesting West Coast. I almost said East Coast. Gross. West Coast matchup in the Pac-12 this weekend. Gentlemen, we got a big one between Washington and Oregon.
Washington is a 3-point favorite.
Well, yeah, number 7 Washington, 3-point favorites, as Keith just said, having to travel to Autzen Stadium to go up against number 17 Oregon Ducks. Washington right now is top in the Pac-12. They're 5-1. That one loss being to Auburn, of course. Oregon is 4-1. Their only loss being to, at that point in time, number 7 Stanford. 38-31. So Oregon, a pretty decent squad themselves, top 20 ranking. This will be an interesting one. Interesting Pac-12. What time is that one coming on? I got to check that to see whether or not we're all awake. Yeah, it's an afternoon. It's
2:30. Yeah, weird.
2:30.
That's like a 9:30 a.m. game for them.
Pac-12 football is not meant to be played before midnight.
No, that seems criminal. That seems really wrong.
I think that's a violation of one of the 10 Commandments.
It's also against the Geneva Convention.
Chandler, who you picking between the Huskies and the Ducks?
The 10 Commandments supersede the Geneva Convention. Washington, some people have said that Washington, 6'7", weighs a freaking ton.
Yeah.
but I think that speed wins. Go Ducks.
Ooh, he's doing it. He's doing it. Keith, who are you thinking?
Well, I thought I was going to be super trendy and super cool and pick the upset, but Chandler did. But I'm still going to pick the upset. Going Oregon. They had a bounce back win against Cal last week. Shut them down. They keep rolling at home.
I like it. I like that prediction a whole lot. I wholeheartedly disagree with both of you, but I like the fact that you're going for it. I'm going with the Huskies to win this one. Stanford had to rally late to beat Oregon in overtime earlier in the year.
That was far and away the wildest game of the season so far, by the way.
Yeah, it was absurd. There's like literally nothing you can take away from that. Absolutely nothing. Washington, on the other hand, has not necessarily blown anyone away. They played some decent squads in Arizona State and BYU. They did actually beat BYU pretty badly, it turns out, 35-7. But I think Washington is slowly returning to the form that they were supposed to be in, and I'm going to pick the Huskies. So.
Well, they've very quietly done what they do,
Yes.
and there's a lot to be said about that. But I think that I watching their offense, they just lack some of that explosion that they need. So
Yeah, I would say that, except I think Myles Gaskin is starting to hit that again.
Yeah.
I mean, this past weekend he rushed for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he did have a good game. I expect him to build on that. So that's my pick right there. Whew. What an episode we just had. What a weekend it was. That was a pretty crazy weekend in the SEC. Hopefully it'll be another this is not necessarily the most entertaining slate of games when you look at it, but it does seem like that Ole Miss, Arkansas, A&M, South Carolina, Georgia, and LSU, those three in particular seem like they could be very, very interesting to pay close attention to. I know Mississippi State has a bye week. Who else has a bye week this week? Who am I overlooking in the SEC that has the bye?
good question.
Who am I overlooking? Kentucky. Kentucky has the bye, right? There it is. Yeah.
I mean, Missouri basically has one.
Right. It's a forced bye in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got some bye weeks, but it was to disrupt the flow of entertaining games, but it should still be a pretty good one in general.
Also, the biggest bye week, of course, being the United States Senate, who has had several rough weeks and now finally gets one off.
Yeah, good for them. They totally deserve it. Yeah. Our country and therefore our entire lives are such a mess. But this podcast is nice and clean, right? Pay attention to the rest of the week. We got a few things coming up. Of course, we've got the numbers game that will come out. I'm going to try to put that one out as normal on Tuesday morning. We've also got our Ole Miss podcast from Chandler called Hey, I've Got Some Thoughts.
Okay, I've got some thoughts.
Okay, I've got some thoughts. Thank you. I drew a blank for some reason. Okay, I've got some thoughts. We've got Gator Rituals from Keith following the Florida Gators. And then myself and Row Hunter, or myself or Row Hunter, or just myself, just Row Hunter. It doesn't matter.
Probably not Row.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and assume that Row is not available this week. We'll have the weekly pessimist following Mississippi State.
He's dead, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, dead to us and dead to the world. Yep. So pay attention. Lots of content coming out on a regular basis on Running Out the Clock, as well as I think we should try to put out some written content. So if you don't visit our website, you should. That's rotc.podbean.com. Who knows? We might break down some jerseys that we've seen so far in the season. See who we like.
We might, but we've been talking about it every week and haven't. So
yeah. Well, I think if we just go ahead and say going to be written material, keep an eye out for it. Maybe we'll get around to it this time.
Name it and claim it.
Love it. Hate it all at the same time. This is Running Out the Clock. Clock's done. I'm tired. I'll see you guys later on. For Chandler, for Keith, not for Row, never for Row, never has been for Row.
Hashtag never Row.
Hashtag not all rows.
Oh, no.